Hey guys, it's Eric with the Taking of Phyrix team. Today is the release of our audio narrative for Adepticon 2024. Before we get to that portion, I just wanted to take a moment and mention a couple of things for people that may be new to our system. Um, for those that are attending Adepticon for the first time or maybe your first Phyrix event, I just wanted to let you know that we actually do a fully written audio recorded narrative for this series. Phyrix has been in production since 2016. Last year, at our first major Adepticon, we did a summarized narrative with Voldemort's Guide to Warhammer to catch you up to all of the mysteries and the stories revolving around Phyrix and the key situations that are important for the story going forward. You can find all of those previous chapters available via our website, which is linktr.ee/Phyrix, linktr.ee/Phyrix, Phyrix. It'll also be linked below in the show notes. Next, I'd like to say a quick thank you to JP with the Age of Darkness podcast. He has lended his awesome narrative skills to us for this year. We've kind of hit a transition point in the Phyrix story, and while we definitely enjoyed working with Voldemort, we felt like the narrative needed to shift tone and structure a little bit. So we were lucky enough to reach out to JP, and he agreed to work with us. So this year's chapter is going to be the first introduction of JP as the narrative voice for Phyrix, and we hope to continue working with him for the upcoming future. I just wanted to give you just a real quick summary before we jump into this, in case you don't have time or you're not able to listen to the previous chapter. So to cue this up, at our last event, the Precipice of Ruin, the Loyalist had just arrived to Saratan 4. Prior to Saratan 4, we were in a section of space called the Amber Strand. And as the Amber Strand progressed, or the story of the Amber Strand progressed, the Loyalists were more and more put onto their heels. The traitors seemed to be just catching momentum and sort of swept them out of the Amber Strand pretty completely. As the Loyalists were fleeing, though, they did come across some information that pointed to potential other planets in the nearby system. Planets that the Amber Strand were connected to in an infrastructure basis. So one of those planets listed was Saratan 4, which was listed as a giant ocean world and a processing hub or a distribution hub for the nearby planets that are around it. So having no real other option, the Loyalists fled to Saratan 4 and were able to, or upon arrival, they find that the ocean world is actually no longer an ocean world. It's a dry core. The remnants of the cities are still there. There is a massive platform for where all the incoming automated ship traffic would be distributed to the rest of the system. But they decide to just take up positions on the orbital to begin with. And that's what played out at our last event, was the bracing of the arrival of the traitors by the Loyalists, and then the traitor arrival. As the events played out throughout the weekend, the traitors came in really hard and took away entire sections of the station from the Loyalists, and it was looking pretty bleak. And at the very last moment, in a moment of awesomeness, the Loyalists were able to secure their final position on the orbital station, allowing them a foothold to launch further planetside missions from there. So picking up into Adepticon, we are talking about the planet fall of Saratan 4, and some of the orbital work will be represented in the ZM tables, as well as some of the other side events that we have running. So with that said, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to join us at Adepticon this year. I look forward to seeing everyone there. I hope you enjoyed the story.
The ruins of Seratan 4. The metal floor of the atrium quivered as the Imperial fists slammed their boarding shields down, forming a wall of flesh and ceramite in front of the station's central elevator. The lucky soldiers who made up this volunteer phalanx holding force were left behind to stall the incoming traitor breaching efforts. Behind them, Tech Marines prepared obstacles and wired explosives to counter the enemy's advance should they start to break through, and to support the eventual withdrawal of the stalwart force. The thin yellow line must stand resolute to give them time. Heavy impacts rocked the solid steel structure surrounding the yellow-clad breachers. Dust fell from the ceiling as the first salvo of the boarding torpedoes hit the structure. The phalanx watched as the nearest bulkhead grew white-hot, warping beneath the heat as bow-mounted melta drills carved through the orbital's outer hull. The superheated hull breach fell inward, tolling the arrival of the hostile forces. In unison, the fists opened fire. A cacophony of bolter rounds beat out a rhythm of controlled death as superheated Volkite rays shrieked through the dusty air, igniting oxygen, burrowing through ceramite, and charring flesh. Traitors piled through the steaming mist left behind as the first bodies collapsed. Body after body fell in pools of transhuman blood at the exit of the boarding craft. Still, they continued to push through the breach.
"Danger right!"
thundered Sergeant Brood through the squad vox as he caught movement on the Auspex scanner on his helmet lens. Before the forlorn phalanx could shift fire, the deep, reverberating boom of a grav cannon drowned out the sounds of bolter fire and close-range combat. Sergeant Brood's squad watched as the bulkheads immediately to their flank crumpled like a tin plate. The weapon of sorcerer's technology twisted the girders away and tore through the metal wall. Beyond the sundered metal, they caught a glimpse of the terror on the other side. Servos screamed, and the wall bowed inward with a massive thud before buckling in the shape of a fist. The right flank of Sergeant Brood's squad rotated in sync to fire on this new threat as it bore down upon them. Servos screamed again beyond the bulking wall as the hulking fist of a Leviathan dreadnought tore through, crushing the metal and pulling the wall back like peeling skin from a corpse. As the breach opened further, a twisted giant of symbiotic ceramite and bulging purple flesh, writ all over with glowing Colchizian runes, became visible. The sergeant immediately leaped to the breach, charging a melta-bomb and hurling it through the shredded hole in the wall. The muffled explosion was followed by a billowing cloud of smoke and dust from atomized steelcrete. It erupted over the Imperial fists, raising a symphony of metal shards clattering off ceramite armor and damaged shields, obscuring visibility. Through the breach, Sergeant Brood heard the whoom, whoom, whoom from the charging coils of the grav cannon again. He opened the vox line to call a warning. He was too late. The 3 Marines nearest to him were smashed to the floor by an overwhelming force. Ceramite armor forged to protect transhuman physiology betrayed the bearers, crushing the Astartes within the very shells meant to sustain them. The broken bodies lay in pools of blood at the bottom of a new crater. Blood painted the floor, the walls, the ceiling, and the entire left side of Sergeant Brood's armor. The Leviathan dreadnought emerged from the smoke and dust like a demon born of destruction. Fleshy mandibles bulged and swayed like dancing intestines from the cracked techno-sarcophagi holding the half-dead remains of the Astartes interred within. Wandering eyes covering the creature's pauldron scanned the dusty hall, overlooking Sergeant Brood and singling in on the remaining line of breachers. In a single swift action, it cleaved through 2 Marines holding the first row of the flank. With the front line so swiftly obliterated, the rear phalanx began to withdraw, harrying the hulking machine with every munition available. The Leviathan lumbered in the middle of the corridor, unfazed by the weight of fire plinking off its hardened shell and bubbling flesh. It lingered for a moment, providing cover for another wave of disembarking assault marines. Then it began its march to the core, every other step accented by another sickening volley of weaponized gravity hurled towards its fleeing prey. The space station clung doggedly to its orbit over Saratan 4 as the traitor assault intensified on nearly all sides. The attempts to breach near the orbital's center were chewed to pieces by the furious ship-to-ship battles taking place above and below the continent-sized orbital. The few drop pods and troop carriers that managed to get through landed squarely in the middle of fortified locations and were summarily eradicated, their burned-out husks only providing more cover to the defensive position. Still, the steady pressure from all sides forced a general concentration of loyalist elements aboard the station. Commanding units of the Imperial Fists, Iron Hands, Ultramarines, and Salamanders knew from the moment they arrived that they would need to hold this position above to have any chance at taking the planet below. Thus, they distributed all their reinforced barriers, rapier batteries, and even had time to plan for the eventual collapse of their perimeter troops. More importantly still, as the battle in orbit raged, forward advanced units of the Raven Guard, Space Wolves, and White Scars were redeployed planetside, scouting out new fronts on which the war would develop. Of the valiant Yellow Shield Wall, only 3 warriors of the Imperial Fist remained, making use of overlapping fields of fire to delay the World Bearer's advance. Tech Marine explosives added to the tar pit they were forcing their pursuers through. After what felt like hours, the 3 Marines rounded the final corner and were bathed in the blinding light of spotlights and fuse lamps from the reinforced position.
Disperse!
Bark brewed into the Vox. The remaining fists sprinted into the light. Ceramite gauntlets painted green and decorated with intricately crafted flames reached over fortified barriers to lift their brothers into the barricades.
What is your disposition, brother?
Asked Sergeant Dronma, his scaled visor illuminated by the open Promethean-fueled flame of his weapon.
We are all that's left from the initial delay position, brother.
Yelled Sergeant Brood, raising his splintered shield on shaking arms.
Very well,
said Dronma. Without hesitation, he activated the detonator he held in his free hand. A cascade of explosions ripped through the ingress passage, felling support beams, ripping great holes in the floor, and filling the close confines of the space station in clouds of dust, smoke, and debris. The obstacles from such devastation might have slowed even an Astartes for a short time, but the Leviathan's grav cannon continued to sickly pulse beyond the visible hallway. Each thundering footstep sounded closer than the last as it bore its way through the intervening wreckage. Sergeant Brood turned and slammed his shield into the barricade ahead of him, clearing his visor and reloading his rifle. He turned to the Astartes to his left and, switching to the external comms, shouted,
we must hold this line. They will have to take every single one of us before we lose this position.
As if on cue, the next grav volley cleared the corner of the corridor, and the lumbering hulk of the twisted Leviathan stepped into view, every eye gleaming with gore-fueled glee. The screams and laughter rang out intermingled. Above Saratan 4, fire and light play the part of clashing gods beyond the abandoned atmosphere. Weaponry archaic and beyond comprehension lashes out in violent hatred, fueled by the petty squabbles and vicious emotion of the mortal men pulling the triggers. Swarms of brutal warframes fly around the floating orbital platform, clashing and shattering against one another in bursts of flame and plasteel as the children of demigods slaughter one another for control. From the chaos in the stars descends a fleet of drop pods draped in heraldry red, white, gray, and black that burned beneath carbon scoring and the hellfire of atmospheric re-entry. They fall like comets from the sky at the end of an era, like angels cast from heaven, like the hammers of war descending to wreak judgment and destruction on a land deserving neither. They fall from the sky to the fated coral world, devoid of its great oceans. They fall to the haunted, sagging hive city clinging to a once glorious reef long devoid of life. They fall to yet another world, and with them, the planet falls into the dark age of chaos. Praetor Volterra's Hull begins moving before the dropship's blast doors are ejected to the ground. His command squad moves with him, the fragile coral shattering beneath the heavy tread of their cataphracti Terminator armor. Before them rises a curving section of the Hive City's ancient seawall, draped in the varicose flesh of withered coral and dead lichen.
Clear,
Reported his men in rasping, smoky whispers. Hull surveyed the area his command squad had landed in. Before them a massive, shuttered vent juts from the wall. The outermost part of what appeared to be some sort of heat exchanger with the now absent ocean, the slats caked in verdigris and rust sit fused by the passing of time.
blow it down.
Says Hull.
The sound signature will be significant, my lord.
Says his adjutant, Bellico.
Unfortunately, we must act with Gate 42 tactics on this mission, brother. Time is short.
Says Hull and points with his lethal clawed gauntlets to the murder skies above. Blast cannon fire streaks across the upper atmosphere, distant rays of blinding light creating momentary suns as cruisers, frigates, and battle barges erupt. Millions die in each explosion. Populations eradicated in silent, distant beauty.
Setting charges.
Says the adjutant as he moves to the massive vent structure. Nearly 30 meters in diameter, this point has been chosen for its expected ease of ingress operations and for reinforcements that would surely follow. Bellico and his peers set 8 charges around the massive copper vent, then moved to take positions against the walls on either side. The melted charges ripped through metal, silence and darkness, creating a breach large enough for Praetor Hull and his Raven Guard assault force.
Move in.
He commands. No more instruction is needed. 5 dark shadows of the more Drathan squad who have followed him since the sorrows of Istvan are the first to vanish inside the breach. The 5 veterans of Squad Corvin move next. Hull follows with his command squad, and 5 more veterans of Squad Sharrak bring up the rear. The remainder of the small landing force will hold the egress point as they move in. One by one, they are embraced by the black depths of the Hive City of Seriton 4. In the pitch darkness of this massive culvert, Hull's men move in staggered columns, eye lenses glowing green as they watch the darkness for movement. They see nothing at all but aged concrete walls, rusting iron girders, and asphalt that cracks beneath their heavy boots. A small distance ahead, a metal wall replaces one side of the pipe as the trajectory of the floor begins to descend and turn inward.
Augury shows this will open to the inner side of the wall, sir.
Says the rasping tones of one of the more Drathan shades.
Breach it and let's get in.
Commands Hull. Eye lenses darken as plasma torches leap into burning blue light up ahead. A portal is swiftly opened in the ancient metal wall, and the Raven Guard warriors step into daylight. Corvin's veteran squad filters out, searching for targets with their combi bolters ready to engage. None present themselves. Moments later, Hull emerges with his cataphracti command squad, and the rear guard follows suit.
Where are we, adjutant?
Says Hull.
Industrial section, my lord. Many of these buildings overhang the seawall overlooking our approach. Secure the area and set up a temporary headquarters.
Hull commands as he takes another glance at the war in the heavens.
Horus's traitors are close behind us, and this Hive City is too valuable a target to seat them. Very good, sir.
Responds the adjutant with a nod to his lord. Turning to the direction of the men, he says,
Shade, you have security. Squads Corvin and Sharrak, conduct initial reconnaissance on our perimeter. I'll find a suitable position and initiate a Vox connection with the drop fleet from here.
The 2 veteran sergeants saluted and with a word step off. A silent, simple click over the Vox net represent the response from the more Drathan shade. In moments, the street was empty once more, the Raven Guard vanishing into the shadows of the structures around and silently executing the commands given. The city feels more than abandoned to Sergeant Corvin. It feels desolate. He watches the empty windows and portals of the block structure surrounding him. They watch back with black, vacant stares, like skulls of concrete gods still trying to figure out how they died. There is something wrong with this place, he thinks. It is not like any of the compliance worlds he has seen before. Those were clearly empty from mass evacuations or targeted extinction campaigns. Here it's different. The streets are empty. No vehicles, no trams, no streetlights. The skeletal remains of buildings loom all around him, each reaching thousands of meters into the thin, pale sky, their weathered faces blank and pockmarked. No decorations, no stamp of the Mechanicum or Imperium, or any patron at all. This is only a nondescript wasteland of hulking husks and barren roads covered in dust, ash, and particulate.
This world has not felt the touch of humanity upon its skin in a very, very long time.
Sergeant Corvin whispers.
Repeat, sir. Transmission incomplete.
Says his subordinate.
Disregard.
Responds Sergeant Corvin as he shakes the thought from his head and resumes leading his squad deeper into the city's corpse. Along the outer flank, Sergeant Sherrick peers around the sharp edge of yet another brutalist square block of harsh concrete construction. He sees before him another street steeped in shadow and void of form. The faintest of winds cries brokenly through a crumbled hole in the distant sea wall. The wind sweeps tiny clouds of ash and dust across the space devoid of anything that may have once hosted life. After a few minutes of silent observation, Sergeant Sherrick steps out in the building's shadow into the pale light of the distant sun. His squad follows in a staggered column. Ceramite boots raise puffs of ash and tiny billows as they silently cross to the base of another blank edifice. The windows of the first floor of the structure are mostly intact, but cataracted with centuries of dust. Using the lumen torch mounted to his combi bolter, Sergeant Sherrick wipes gently at the edge of the window, peers into the interior. It's hard to make out anything, but still the space within feels vast and empty. No desks, no chairs, no light fixtures, hanging wires, or decorations of any kind. Only bare walls of harsh concrete and the detritus of forgotten ages.
Empty.
Said Sherrick.
Just like the last block. Shall we conduct a preliminary sweep, Sergeant? No.
Sherrick replies. An uncomfortable feeling has begun growing between his shoulder blades, like an itch he cannot scratch. This wasn't fear. He was immune to that basic emotion. This instead just prompted extreme caution.
Move on to the next.
He clicks off his lamp and begins stalking down the edge of the barren road.
Righty!
Says Sergeant Corvin. His squad checks their weapons and validates their status on his visor.
Move!
He orders. In a single smooth motion, the 5 Astartes fan out, combi bolters raised as they quickly cross the road together towards the next structure. Ahead of them is the first building they have encountered that does not seem utilitarian in design. Its 4 tiers and overhanging balconies stand in stark contrast to the blank walls and hard edges of the city around it. It sits there, as a relic of a time before, archaic but vaguely familiar. A grand entrance, if you could call it that, lies centered at the base floor. Small copper remnants of the ancient doors cling to the hinges. The rest eroded or lost to time. Inset to the stone, on either side of the door, reliefs of oceanic figures are still barely visible. Vague motifs of ships, waves, and other aquatic themes play to the edge of existence. All their detail is worn smooth by age and wind. Corvin's squad moves forward to the base of the building, pauses for barely a moment, and then sweeps through the open doorway on the main floor. They spread out along both sides as their lumen torches pierce the darkness, divulging the contents of the room they now stand in. The lobby of this odd building is scattered with random dispersions of rubble and trash, and a larger mound in the center of the room. Several holes have opened in the ceiling above, exposing parts of the second floor. The piles of scrap from those collapses are listing over the skeletons of some ancient pews. To the hypersensitive sight of the Astartes, it is obvious that some kind of struggle took place here, or that at least something had shifted the entire room's contents towards the central area. Corvin's squad moves forward, illuminating the dusty room with sweeping arcs from the barrel-mounted lumens. Rockcrete rubble, torn parchment, and other detritus cover the ground beneath their boots. As they circumvent the central mound in the room, a single large metallic cable stretches out from the pile towards the back wall. Something about it strikes Corvin as out of place. Above the cable, the rear wall is covered by a mural of inset carvings. The same motifs outside are repeated here, but here they have been spared the coarse erosion of time. Chipped blues and dull turquoise make up a swirling sea around a central brass-colored city that reaches towards the heavens. Inset in random spaces of the sea are the rough shapes of vessels, large fish, and tentacled creatures. Primitives are pictured in relief to be worshipping the sea things, and Corvin is disgusted by the heresy.
Sergeant, have you noticed?
Asked one of the Raven Guard as he panned his light around the empty back corners of the room.
Yes.
Said Corvin, walking towards the fallen cable, realizing now why it seemed so odd. He taps it with his boot. The dense metal casing thuds against ceramite. He traces its route with his eyes from the edge of the room towards the central pile, where it emerges from a crumbled mess of plasterite and debris.
This place is more than empty. We haven't seen anything to indicate any form of technology. No vehicles, no bodies, no discarded cogitators or tablets. No clues as to what happened. No technology, barely any metals of any kind, except for this. What is it, sir? Something that doesn't belong,
said Corvin.
Sergeant, the stairs are over here.
Vox is another veteran. They form up near the base of the stairs and then begin to ascend to the second floor. The Mordreathan Shade kneels in a shadowed crenellation between two massive concrete blocks overlooking the streets below. Ident runes move across the incomplete digital map of the city sector on the interior of his helmet's display. Small dashes indicate the paths taken by his little brothers below. He moves the scope of his Nemesis bolt rifle across the decaying cityscape, slowly cataloging future firing positions, fallback points, and kill zones. A dozen scenarios play out in his head as he plans angles and shots.
Testing the command Vox relay. Shade. Respond if you can hear us,
said the voice of Adjutant Bellicoso. The Shade clicks a silent response through the net.
Very good. We will.
The Shade hears the shot before the Adjutant speaks his next word. His practiced instincts bring his bolter scope to his retinal range band monocle. Far away, past towering concrete blocks, he sees Sergeant Sherrick collapse in the ashen street. The left side of his helmet is missing. Blood runs in a river over the shattered ceramite. All of this happens while the echo from the shot still lingers in the space. The Shade sweeps his rifle to the left. In perfect practiced execution, he scans the portions of walls he has already inventoried. It takes less than a moment for him to see the small eddies of the disturbed dust around one of the lower level rubble piles. With a thought, he awakens the machine spirit of his lens, zooming in, bringing the details into full focus. Something in the stillness moves, and he squeezes the trigger thoughtlessly. A mist of red fills the lens of the scope.
Shade, report!
Snaps the Praetor Hall.
Threat eliminated. Unknown combatant. Single operator. Squad Sherrick is engaged, Shade. Send 2 of your Mordreathan to assist. Do you have eyes on Squad Corvin? Negative. Find them.
The first shot echoes through the ruins of the Hive City, sounding like it comes from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The second shot comes only a moment later. Sergeant Corvin and his squad take cover as the Vox crackles to life.
Sergeant Corvin, report!
Says the voice of Praetor Voltaire's Hole.
My lord, we have breached a conspicuous building in the northern quarter of our ingress, and we are preparing to investigate further. We heard 2 shots. The traitor is here, said Hull.
His voice calm but grim.
Return to the temporary HQ with haste. Yes, lord,
said Corvin. The veterans leap into action and sprint to the stairwell. As they reach the door, the entire structure around them begins to rumble and shift.
What's happening?
Yells one of the members of the squad.
I don't plan for us to stay and find out,
shouts Corvin as he clears the door and begins bounding down the stairwell as everything around him shakes violently. They reach the ground floor and step into the atrium. Detritus and rubble have shifted and the level above is collapsing, closing off more and more of the space between Corvin's squad and the exit. The massive steel cable is gone. The entire rubble pile seems to be churning and sinking in a blender of rubble and trash. He steps towards the pile, bolter armed, lumen torch focused on the stirring mass ahead of him. His Vox clicks with a clash of static as the pile suddenly parts. The massive cable stretches up, rearing like the long extinct serpents of Terra. The end snaps open in a sharp metallic bang. Maws of serrated inset teeth churn around a white, hot core.
Emperor's name.
Grasped Corvin. His combi bolter erupts in a cascade of fire as the metal serpent strikes towards him and the ceiling collapses in an avalanche of rockcrete and dust. Beyond the desolate hive city, drop pods fall from the sky onto the coral mass below. The first engagements on the ruins of Seratan 4 have begun.